Truth here, and welcome to Otaku Evolution. Batman! The Dark Knight. The Caped Crusader. The world's greatest detective. Batman, created by Bill Finger, and a little bit by Bob Kane, is probably the most popular comic book character of all time, and he's been a ubiquitous figure of pop culture for decades. I think we all know the origin story. A young boy born to a wealthy family witnesses the murder of his parents and swears to war on all criminals, which he does dressed like a creature of the night. He oftentimes fights gimmick villains, bad guys like the Joker, Riddler, Penguin, and Two-Face. And he's not always alone, fighting with a whole host of other characters by his side. Don't buy into the whole Batman is a loner shtick. He's a loner like I'm a success. I have a pretty strong fondness for the character myself, having read Batman comics since I was a child, and also having collected several trade paperback volumes. I reviewed both Batman Eternal and Batman and Robin Eternal for my Otaku Revolution blog. I've seen a lot of Batman media, like the Tim Burton movies, the phenomenal Batman the Animated Series, and even the mostly really crappy direct-to-video Batman features. Seriously, outside of Under the Red Hood, Batman Year One, and The Dark Knight Returns, these features are just abominable. Let's hope they don't mess up the Long Halloween when they finally get to that. What's your platonic ideal of Batman? Who are your favorite Batman writers? What's your favorite Batman run? Who's your favorite Batman artist? What's your favorite tone for Batman? Is your idea of Batman the Dick Sprang era, perhaps? Maybe you prefer the grim and gritty Frank Miller style. I think the closest to my platonic ideal of Batman is, at least in comics, the 1970s Dennis O'Neil run, illustrated mostly by Neil Adams and Irv Novick. There's just enough bounce between grim avenger of the night, detective, and swashbuckling adventurer for me. But I've also been a fan of the more relatively recent Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo era. It all depends on the storylines, I think. Some are stronger than others. Now that you've seen and heard my bona fides, let's venture into Batman's history in Japan. You see, Batman is no stranger to the world of Japanese pop culture. The late Jiro Kuwata created the Bat manga, Batman and Robin stories that were published in Shonen King magazine in 1966. They hadn't been collected until 2008, and are available to buy now. But Kuwata's Batman stories aren't the only Batman manga around, because Kiya Asamiya created Batman Child of Dreams in 2000, which was published in Magazine Z before it was collected. Then there was Batman Death Mess by Yoshinori Natsumi from 2008. But let's not fall down that rabbit hole, or bat hole, too much, because we have today's specific anime to talk about. That is to say, 2008's Batman Gotham Knight. It's in the Nolanverse. Christopher Nolan and David S. Goyer made 3 Batman movies, starting with Batman Begins in 2005. The trilogy is lauded for bringing Batman back to form after the wacky Joel Schumacher movies. Batman Gotham Knight is a collection of animated shorts that take place in the same universe, in between Batman Begins and 2008's The Dark Knight. The continuity is actually a little fuzzy, but most of it can be hand-waved. The first of our shorts is Have I Got a Story for You, animated by Studio 4C. It begins with a group of children in an indoor skate park where they regale each other of tales of witnessing Batman taking on a criminal. The first child describes Batman as being a living shadow. The second saw him as a giant bat monster. And the third insists that Batman is some kind of robot. Each has their own interpretation of the masked hero shined through the lens of a child's imagination. But at the end, Batman appears in the skate park, still fighting the same criminal, and getting help from another of the kids. This version of him is the more traditional Caped crime fighter. This story is a reference to Batman number 250 from 1973, and the story The Batman Nobody Knows by Frank Robbins and Dick Giordano. There was also an episode of the new Batman adventures by the name Legends of the Dark Knight, with a similar concept. It even had an adaptation of The Dark Knight Returns in it. Neat. The second installment of Gotham Knight is called Crossfire by Production IG, which sees Gotham City police detectives Crispus Allen and Anna Ramirez caught in, well, the crossfire of a fight between the Italian and Russian mobs. Allen, who expressed distrust of Batman to his partner, witnesses him saving her.
I'll do it! I'll do it!
No, you won't.
I'm assuming that Ramirez is supposed to be based off the character Renee Montoya, a supporting Batman character for several years until she became the Question. Crispus Allen was also a supporting character, though not as long-running, first appearing in Detective Comics 742 in 2000. Eventually he became the host of the entity called The Spectre. The third chapter by Bee Train is called Field Test, and it involves Batman field testing an experimental force field during yet another battle between the Italian and Russian mobs. Batman is desperate to get the wounded goon medical attention, not wanting to be responsible for any loss of life. He then decides to scrap the force field altogether to avoid further incidents. Personally, I think he should have just tweaked it a bit so that it stops the bullets altogether instead of redirecting them, but maybe that's just too much science fiction. This part includes the character Lucius Fox, who debuted way back in Batman number 307 in 1979, created by Len Wein and John Kanan. He served as a confidant for Bruce Wayne for decades of comics. In the Nolanverse, he was famously portrayed by Morgan Freeman. Studio Madhouse brought us In Darkness Dwells, which sees Batman track down a kidnapped cardinal beneath Gotham City. It's there that he encounters Killer Croc, a former inmate at Arkham Asylum who's been influenced by villain Scarecrow's toxins and torture. This one feels like it could have easily been fleshed out into a full 20-something minute television episode, with its more involved storyline. As is, it's one of the better shorts, where Batman gets to confront two of his rogues gallery. Believe it or not, when Killer Croc, created by Jerry Conway, Don Newton, and Gene Colan, debuted in 1983, he was a rising crime boss character. He was sort of the original Bane, a huge hulking beast of a man, but not an unthinking brute. He had cunning and killer instincts, and even made the Joker nervous. It wasn't until years later he was turned more animalistic and lizard-like, and at this point is just a purely physical threat. It's a real shame. He's one of the most misused Batman villains. Scarecrow, on the other hand, first appeared in the golden age of comics, if you can believe it. Created by Bill Finger and Bob Kane, Scarecrow was just a fearsome figure all on his own, his trademark fear toxin not debuting until the Silver Age. And he was in Batman Begins, portrayed by Cillian Murphy. Studio 4C's second short, Working Through Pain, sees Batman struggling with a grievous wound to his abdomen, flashing back to his world travels. He sought out the help of a woman called Cassandra to help him learn to deal with extreme pain. She suggests that mental anguish and spiritual pain are something that Bruce ignores, but teaches him to deal with physical pain. After several months of training, Bruce learns to work through pain. One day, Cassandra is confronted by angry villagers and Bruce defends her. This upsets her and she sends him away, disappointed that he never learned to deal with his emotional pain. In the comics, Bruce Wayne had trained around the world with many figures, some of whom appeared to him again in his life as Batman. Two of them, Henry Ducard and David Kane, were assassins who trained him in manhunting and the killing arts respectively. Obviously, Batman doesn't kill, so he learned to hold back. Working Through Pain provides an interesting insight to Batman's hardiness in combat we usually don't get in Batman stories. Rounding out Gotham Knight is Studio Madhouse's Deadshot. This Yoshiaki Kawajiri-directed feature opens with Bruce Wayne contemplating the murder of his parents and the seduction of gun use.
You have to know your enemy, Alfred. I'd never use one, but even I can appreciate the attraction of a gun.
The majority of this short involves Batman tracking down a super talented assassin, Floyd Lawton, codenamed Deadshot, who plans on assassinating Lieutenant Gordon. Addicted to complexity, Lawton decides he'll snipe Gordon from a moving train. When Batman moves in, it turns out to be a trap, and a battle begins. Of course, Batman comes out on top, and both Deadshot and his employer are arrested.
It was just like that night in the alley, Alfred. The closeness of the walls, the gunfire. It seems I've been trying to stop those 2 bullets all my life.
The popular visual portrayal of Deadshot as we know him, with his badass costume, is actually the work of the Bronze Age of comics, and Marshall Rogers during his and Steve Englehart's run of Detective Comics. Originally, Deadshot had a very different look, back in 1950s Batman number 59, where he was created by David Verne Reed, Lou Sayre Schwartz, and Bob Kane. He was revamped into what we see now, an iconic member of the Suicide Squad. And that's Batman Gotham Knight, folks, a Batman anime. The shorts are, overall, all pretty decent, but I feel like the only real standouts are In Darkness Dwells and Deadshot, and could see either one of them as more fleshed out features that stand on their own if just further developed. It was fun getting to talk about Batman on my little anime review show. I don't think I'll ever get a chance to do it again unless I review Batman Ninja. But the question is, what makes Batman so appealing? I think the reason why I like Batman so much, what I believe appeals to people in general about him, is that he's this thing that's scary enough to frighten evil, but is also our friend. He shoulders the burden of the blackness in human nature and responds with action, but with mercy and, when written correctly, aplomb in humanity. That's it for this week's Otaku Evolution, but I'm not done with American superheroes, because next time I'll be looking at the X-Men anime. Until then, see ya!